Oh, hey, I'm loud. Hey, if you're on the foyer and you're planning to stay for this, or if you're out talking, if you could kind of make your way to your chairs. I know we love to chat and love to spend time with each other, so that's great. So again, I want to thank Don for coming and sharing. So Don and Esther are going to together share the work they're doing over there in Ukraine. And I think you're hoping to have some time in the end for Q&A, right? They're hoping to have some time for questions, answers after everything's done. So as they're talking, if you have questions, keep them in your brain or write them down, and then hopefully we'll have some time for them to do that. So I'm going to pray and then turn it over to them. So let's pray. God, thank you for the work you're doing in and through this tragedy. And Lord, we just pray for Don and Esther as they share, Lord, that you'd encourage us by what you're doing throughout the world right now as refugees scatter. And we just pray that you'd encourage us and challenge us to be your hands and feet wherever we are. In your name we pray. Amen.
I don't think we need that.
Okay. No, this was the one I was...
Well, we're happy to be with you and to share a little bit more of what's going on. I would really like to just thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. Mission Eurasia has been serving in the former Soviet Union for a long time, and they're primarily a training organization, but because of the war, they've had to pivot to a humanitarian aid mission as well. And so thank the Lord we have all these resources of people who have been trained, who are able to then be the hands and feet during a crisis and give out humanitarian aid as well. I want to share a story with you, Olga's story. Olga and her husband Maxim and her little girl Sophia came to our center in Warsaw. They are believers in Jesus, and I asked them to share their story with me. And they had a little different story because they decided to stay in Ukraine for quite a while. And their city, Melitopol, came under Russian occupation. It wasn't a city that was destroyed by the Russians. Rather, the tanks came in, the soldiers came in, and they took over the government that was there and made themselves the government. And so they were living under Russian occupation. I asked her what this was like, and she said, well, you got used to tanks rolling down the street, soldiers going, you just kept your head down, tried not to make any, strange moves or anything, hoping. You started to recognize the different kinds of artillery, whether it was enemy fire because you're close to the front line, or your own. And then suddenly, the electricity's not working. The internet's not working. The supplies in the stores are disappearing. The pharmacy doesn't have the medicines you need. So they decided to stay and help the elderly in their building and their parents. And she would often spend her day searching through the city for medicine, food. Sometimes it would be 4 hours in line for a loaf of bread. And she said it was really just so difficult because when the internet would go out, every once in a while it would come back on and you'd try to connect with your family and friends. Are you okay? Where are you? What are you doing? And then it would go out again and you wouldn't have any connection for a long time. So they stayed for quite a while. She was a member of that church that we talked about in the service, that the soldiers came in and shut down the church. She was a member of that church in Melitopol. But the last straw for her, when they decided they needed to leave, was when her daughter said to her, Mom, if the Russians shoot me, will I die quickly or slowly? Because if it's quick, it won't hurt, and I'll be in heaven. But if it's not, it's going to hurt really bad. And she thought, my daughter's under too much stress. We can't stay here. We need to leave. Well, now the issue is you're in Russian-occupied territory. You're by the front lines. How do you get to Ukraine? Because you don't want to cross where the fighting's happening. So they decided to escape through Crimea, which was annexed by Russia illegally in 2014. They went through Crimea and then to Georgia, and the Lord provided for them, because a lot of people who took that route, the men were not allowed to go, or they were interrogated for hours. Some of them were beaten before they were let go, but they were eventually allowed to leave. They went through Georgia and eventually came to Poland. So because of that, she actually is there with her husband, which is unique for many of the families whose husbands have had to stay behind. But you know, when she came to to Poland, she said, so many people helped me, I want to help other people. And so she has been helping and just volunteering at our refugee center, handing out aid. She's a very good English speaker, so she's been teaching English. And in the midst of this, she has been serving. This is just one of the many stories of people who we meet every day.
As Phil mentioned, we are very open to questions along the way. He said, hold on till the end. If somebody during our talk, if you guys want to ask a question, you can go ahead and do that, because we want this time to be a little bit more interactive where possible. So feel free to do that. And you might even want to ask us questions about what it was really like to have Carl visit us when we were in Kazakhstan. I said all the sappy stuff before, but I could tell you other stories too. Very directionally challenged man. Where's the back of the church, Carl? Yeah. So anyway, so we want to share a little bit more about the picture of what it's been like for us in Poland. I shared a little bit during the message and so forth, but you can see these are statistics that are actually, I assume you can see them up there. Yeah, you can see them. Statistics that are new right now. There was more displaced and more refugees at the beginning of the war, but the number of refugees and displaced people, both inside Ukraine and in Poland, continues to be very, very high. 3.7 million people internally displaced today. 6.5 million refugees have been recorded globally. So we're talking about over 1/4 of an entire nation is either displaced outside the country or inside the country. You know, the United States is what, 350 million people? So we're talking about like 80 million, if I got my math right, that would be displaced from America. It's huge, and it's very, very impactful. Poland has hosted the most of these refugees, nearly 60%. Today in Poland, approximately 1.3 million refugees remain who have come since the war started. But if you go back before the war, or before the full-scale invasion just over 2 years ago, you have another 1.3 million. So you got 2.5, 2.6 million Ukrainians in the country of Poland. That's a big, big group of people who are in great need. That group, by the way, that came before, a lot of them were related to the first invasion and occupation in Crimea and the eastern Ukraine, Donbass area. So there continues to be a lot of need for the Ukrainian people. And we have worked for the last 2 years. Our Ukrainian team has worked really hard to try and meet the needs of those Ukrainians. I mentioned during the service that we've been able to help approximately 100,000 through our 2 centers. That includes evacuations in the early going. That includes finding housing for people. That includes lots of food distribution, a lot of food distribution in Poland itself. Who are these kids? This is a picture that I took when I was at the border in March of 2022. I actually went over and was on the Ukrainian side of the border. I needed to make contact with some of our Ukraine team that was unable to exit, so I went in and was able to spend a little bit of time with them. And when I came out, this is a little boy amongst hundreds that were in line at the border. We're waiting to go back through into Poland. 90% of refugees are women and children. That goes back to what we talked about before, the fact that anyone from the age of 18 to 60, a male, is unable to leave Ukraine except for certain circumstances. Obviously, the story that Esther shared is one circumstance. Another one would be if you have 3 or more children, or you have a handicap of some sort, or you're caring for an elderly parent. Those kinds of things are exceptions. But for the most part, as you can see, 90% of refugees in Poland would be, or really in anywhere, are women and children. 14.6 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. That's obviously not the number that matches what I said about Poland, but that's inside Ukraine, in Poland, in Germany, in Czech Republic. That's the number of people that still have great need. We don't hear about it on the news, but the needs continue to be great. On our display table in the back, there's some brochures about what Mission Eurasia does. As Esther said at the beginning, we're a training organization. We train next generation leaders how to live intentionally for Christ. We work with church pastors for church planting and for building up the church of Jesus and seeing it expand and so forth. That's our bread and butter. But during the war, we've turned into a humanitarian organization. But humanitarian work costs. So if you are interested in helping us to be able to provide more aid to Ukrainians, please don't hesitate to do that and talk to us afterwards if you want more information. Let's see, where are we at? So one of the places that our refugee center in Warsaw, this specifically is in Warsaw, but also there's places like this down in Krakow. In the first 2 years of the war. These are starting to close now, but to find and to go into a place like an expo center. We're talking about one of those big exhibition halls that is a couple football fields large. And we walked in, and it's bed after bed after bed in Poland where they're caring for Ukrainians. And we were asked to come in as the church to try to help. Now imagine you're in a room with, at that time, about 3,000 people in that part of the expo center. You go over to another part, you might have another 1,000 over here and so forth. And you're asked, help. Where do you go? What do you do? We learned very, very quickly that every single Ukrainian coming out of Ukraine had their own story. And Esther wanted to share one of those stories.
So as we would go into these expo centers, we would just pray that the Lord would show us who to talk to, because, you kind of felt like you're invading someone's space. This is their whole life on a cot. Mm-hmm. Some of them had their pets, cats on a leash, dogs in a little cage, and if one dog starts barking, the rest decide they want to join in. And you didn't want to invade their space. So we just would pray, Lord, who do you want us to talk to? And we would look for people that were sitting on the edge of their bed, kind of bored, kind of looking like they wanted someone to talk to, and we'd ask them how we could pray for them and to share their story. And a lot of the ministry there, and this was not a daily thing, this was just when we had opportunity, was just listening to people and praying for them. And every person we talked to allowed us to pray for them. There was one older gentleman who was embarrassed and didn't want me to pray. But everyone else wanted prayer, and we were able to share the gospel, if not in our conversation, in our prayer for them. But one little boy, big guy here, 12 years old, Danny, he was asking me if I had a phone charger, because their phone had run out of charge. So we were trying to help him find that. And in talking to him, I met his mom and his 1-year-old little sister. His mom had a little disability. She could walk, but she walked with struggle. And she said to me, we've been here 4 days. I don't know what to do. I have an address. Somebody gave me a contact in Germany. I have a place to go in Germany, but I have no idea how to get there. And so we said, we don't know either, but let's pray. So we just prayed with them, and then Don went over to the information station and found out that every day there was a bus that leaves for Berlin, and anybody who has a contact in Germany can get on that bus. But she didn't know that Berlin was in Germany. She heard those announcements, but she didn't realize that that would be the path. And so we were able to help get her passport and her kids and get them registered for the next bus so that she could make her way to the next spot. So this was some of the things that we were doing, just helping people with the next steps. People were frozen, just what do I do next? One woman we found had lost her phone, didn't know any numbers of contacts, which I'm like, wow, that's a reminder to me because I don't remember contact numbers anymore, right? Like I used to have phone numbers in my head, but they're all in my phone. She had no way to contact anyone. So we were just thinking, how can we get her name out there? Put it on Facebook, put it on, social media. So-and-so is looking for her family. Please call this number, because she got a new phone from the refugee center, just a flip phone with a new number, but had no one to call. So these are the kind of things that people are just facing as they have to flee a country.
Esther?
Yeah.
How many people would be on your team when you entered that expo center with 3,000 people?
Yeah,
Was it just you two, or was it a whole bunch of people?
No, we had actually a Ukrainian church from America at the time had come. And so there was probably about 10 of us. Yeah. And we had to get special permission to go in. This is like a UN facility or something. But as long as we wore a yellow vest, we could get in. Now they're a lot better with security, which is actually good, because you want to make sure the right people are getting in there and not
Concerns for human trafficking.
yeah,
and
human
such.
trafficking and things can be an issue. That was a big issue in Poland with all these vulnerable people. So, so it was only about 10 of us. So there's just not, and so what we've done over time, we've gotten to know the director a little bit. So there's been some from our team who've gone and taught English to people that stayed there for a long time, especially if they had large families, they couldn't find placements for them. So now if you go in the expo center, I think it closed down? It's closed down, but the last time we were there, they had like boards between each family, so at least you had your own little space. We also did a Christmas program there, gave out gifts to the kids and shared the gospel. We've done, our friend did an English club and a Bible study for people that were interested, Precepts Bible study. So there's been other things offered since this time as well.
And while that center is closed, there's other centers that are open around the country, and our teams try to find where those places are so they can go in and help them, provide aid. There's orphanages around Warsaw that took kids in from Ukraine, and you go into an orphanage and you've got 500 kids that are Ukrainian kids from an orphanage in Ukraine, now 2 years in, living in Poland. And so our team, and we have a Christian psychiatrist that we work with who partners closely with us. She's part of the staff of that particular center. So while things are dynamic and changing, we're still trying to adapt and meet new needs as they are today. So we've had refugee centers, opened up 2 refugee centers, one in Warsaw, one in Krakow. And you can, for us, the refugee center didn't mean residential. We were located at a church building, and that was true down in Krakow, true in Warsaw as well. So we had a group of believers that existed before the war started. And this is actually a neat provision of the Lord. There was a war that started 10 years or 8 years before the full-scale invasion. And so you had all those people I mentioned before that are living in Poland already because they were living as refugees because of the first invasion, Crimea and Donbass. So here they are, and you actually had Ukrainians that came over to Poland. Some Send people got involved in this as well. Send International people got involved in this as well. Chad Wiebe, who's visited here, and others, helping to plant churches in Poland. And one church planter from Ukraine, from Western Ukraine, his name was Pastor Misha. And he's in Poland trying to help establish a church, has been there for I think it's 8 years now, building a church. And then when the war starts, the neat thing of God's provision is that there was a foundation on which to build to the next place. A church of 150 or so when the war starts, exploding out to 600-700 people, but there's already a church existing. There's a place that's already reaching out to refugees, and Mission Eurasia came alongside and said, we want to help you do that much bigger, much more, because it's just as a single church made up of refugees, they don't have much in terms of resources. So we were able to give them resources to be able to do it. But it's neat to see how then this Ukrainian team, refugees from before, refugees from now, are able to meet the needs of, like I said, 100,000 Ukrainians in the last 2 years.
So some of the ways we've been able to help is just, humanitarian aid, literature and gospel distributions, just listening to people's stories and praying for them. And then we provided a lot of evangelistic special events to encourage them, things like their Independence Day. We had, you can go through the next slides. The Independence Day, we had special celebrations where they were able to wear their Ukrainian outfits and do crafts that represent their country. And now we've kind of made a shift a little bit to helping them integrate, because now it's been 2 years. There are many people who would still like to go back, but they don't have anything to go back to, or they are not safe if they go back. And so they're trying to figure out, what do I do now? So now they need to integrate into Polish society until this war ends, and we don't know how long that's going to be. And some of them have decided to stay long term. So we're providing English lessons, Polish lessons, because it's the European Union. You need to know English to get a good job. Mm-hmm. We have business classes to help people get the things that they need to be able to be working in Poland. As well as now there's IT. I think we have a picture of that.
Maybe. Yep.
So this is the most recent
on the right
class.
obviously.
Is some people in Norway donated computers, and so we're able to train up young people so that they could get some job skills in IT. And then children's ministries is a really big part of our ministry. Summer camps, and also Gift of Hope. And Gift of Hope is something that Mission Eurasia has been doing for years. So you know how Samaritans, how many of you have packed up a Samaritan's purse box at some point? So years ago in Russia, they stopped allowing Samaritan's Purse to send in the boxes. So Samaritan's Purse partnered with Mission Eurasia, and they made the boxes in Russia and had the Russian church fill them and hand them out there. And so Mission Eurasia has been doing this all over Eurasia since that started. And so in Poland, we provided 10,000 gifts of hope for the kids during Christmas, and every box has a scripture in it for children. And when Don was there just a couple weeks ago, he met this little girl who got one of those boxes. You want to share that story, or you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. So you can see she has crutches. This little girl, Alina, she had multiple surgeries on her back. She and her mother fled from Bucha, which was where a lot of atrocities happened at the beginning of the war. They don't even want to talk about it, but they were able to get out.
They ran out the one side of Bucha while the Russian troops were entering the city on the other side, just in time.
And that place was completely destroyed, and awful atrocities happened there. So it's really heartbreaking. But this little girl had to have several back surgeries. I don't know if this was related to the war or just her own life, but she had to lay flat and wasn't allowed to leave her apartment for months. So she wasn't able to attend our Christmas program where the Gift of Hope was handed out. But one of her friends told our staff about her and said, I want to make sure she gets a gift. So they allowed her to take this gift to her. Well, after she is doing better in rehab, she came to one of our classes, and this is an art therapy class. So kids can come, and we have a psychologist that does art, and through art and expression, they get to share some of their losses and what's been happening in their lives. And one of our volunteers offered her a Bible, and she said, oh, I got one of those. My friend brought me this gift, and it had a Bible in it, and you wouldn't believe it. There's this story where Jesus died and he actually came to life again. Can you believe it? She was so excited about that story. So our staff was able to share with her, give her another Bible, because we have several children's Bibles, so that she can read another one, because she said she had already read through the whole thing. And one of the neat things in Poland is because our Ukrainians have fled, they're very happy to have any literature in their own language.
Yeah.
So they are, every event we have literature tables out, and Ukrainians are readers. I mean, they love to read, and so anything we hand out, they just want to take it. So we're thankful that the literature distribution is having its effect as well.
One of the things we've had to get involved with as well is trauma care. And this is actually is a huge need inside Ukraine as well as outside. Virtually every child at some level has issues related to trauma. And rebuilding Ukraine is going to take a very long time, and I'm not talking about buildings. We're talking about lives. Kids who have been separated from dads, kids who've lost homes, kids who have lost an uncle, a grandfather, a father to the war itself. Last summer, when we were at camp, one of the camps that we did last summer, I remember on the very last day, we got a phone call that one of the teenage girls at camp, her father on the front line back in Ukraine, had died. And we were starting to pray for her, but don't tell her about this. So we're all heartbroken. We come back to Warsaw in a couple of vans that we had, and the pastor and her mom are waiting for her, and she gets out and finds out what happened, and they prayed together. And mom and her went into Ukraine to be at the father's funeral. But some neat stories even from that. The mother and the daughter, because of the care of our staff through camp, she had come to Christ. I should mention that during camp. She'd come to Christ during camp. And because of the care that they received at that time, they continue to be involved back in Warsaw at our center. Of course, they came back after the funeral took place. So those are the kinds of stories. One of the things I also want to mention, she might not mention this, so I will. When the war first started, there was a meeting of Ukrainian Baptist leaders involved with children's ministry. And there was this material by Crisis Care Training International that was a workbook, 10 lessons to help a child process the trauma, the losses, the things that they're dealing with. And all the Ukrainian Sunday school teachers that were there and leaders said, we're afraid to use this. We don't understand how to use this. And Esther shared an idea at that meeting. Well, what if we associated lessons from the life of Christ, straight from the Bible, and did Bible lessons from the life of Christ and connected that to this particular workbook? Well, they said, that's a great idea. And you know how it works with these kinds of ideas. Do it. So summer a year ago, Esther spent writing these 10 stories from the life of Christ, from the Gospels, that talk about various issues. Jesus lost. He cried when Lazarus died. It hurts when someone is lost. Going through all of these different aspects of the life of Christ. And ultimately, there was this curriculum that was produced. And if you could read this, it says Esther Parsons at the top, together with a co-author who's a Ukrainian gal. It was quite the process when Esther was writing it. Wrote it in English, sent it over, and it was translated to Ukrainian, and then they worked on it, made it very Ukrainian, culturally appropriate, sent it back to Esther. She back translated it. We speak Russian and read Russian, but not Ukrainian, so had to go multiple directions back and forth. The editor lived in Germany as a refugee. One of the main coordinators was living in Vancouver, Canada as a refugee. So this process was a truly global process, but now we have about 2,000 of these books have been distributed around Ukraine and are being used effectively to help Ukrainian kids going through trauma. And our center in Warsaw, we're doing a lot of these different kinds of trauma cares of various sorts.
This picture is a little boy who drew this picture while his mom was talking to one of our volunteers. And then the volunteer said, "What's the picture?" And he said, "It's a maze, and it's me and my mom running from the bad uncles." And it was Russian soldiers that he was running from. And so as he's sitting, just playing, he's sharing what is on his heart. And that's how children express what's going on, through play, through art, through things like this. And it's very important that they are able to share this so that they can get the help, so that it's not ignored.
Actually, there's the book that we were just talking about that the workbook that Esther helped supplement. Some of the other things that I mentioned before, that Mission Eurasia is a training organization. Our main training platform is called School Without Walls. And it's a program that helps Ukrainian youth, and that the definition of youth is pretty broad. It goes from about 16 to 30. So young people. It helps them to live intentionally for Christ, whether they're in school, whether they're in the workplace, wherever area of life that they are in, helping them to know how to share the gospel, helping them to know how to read the Bible, helping them to know how to lead in a church and do evangelistic outreaches, and so on and so forth. So it's multiple churches in dozens, actually hundreds of different locations all around the former Soviet Union, all around Eurasia, churches coming together maybe once a month for a special focused training for these young people. That's what we've done. We have launched that in Poland for the Ukrainian church, and it's now taking place in 3 cities, but actually it's in more than that, because there's people coming from other cities to those locations, wherever the closest proximity is. So we're trying to develop Ukrainians in Poland. So that's young next generation leaders, but also church planting and leadership development. The president of the Baptist Union in Ukraine a year and a half ago talked to me and said, we really need to do something to come alongside Ukrainian leaders who are planting churches in Poland, Germany, Czech Republic, and so forth. And he said, if Mission Eurasia can help do this, I would be extremely grateful. And Brother Yuri Davidyuk from Rivne in Ukraine, a refugee himself, he and his wife there in the picture, passionate about mentoring, training leaders, is himself involved in a church plant in southern Poland now, has been involved in church plants in Ukraine as well. He is providing online as well as face-to-face training for leaders. These leaders are scattered. You have to understand, they're planting churches, and it might be a mature believer who goes to this city, looks around and sees and this is a true story, sees a dormitory with 250 people, Ukrainians living in it, and it's like, we need to do something to reach out to them. And so they decide to start a church, but he doesn't have any training himself, no formal biblical training. So Yoda's coming alongside of him and saying, hey, can I help you? And so providing pastoral training for fledgling and growing and emerging churches all throughout Poland and all throughout the area. So that's definitely something that I would strongly encourage you to be praying for.
So I just want to go back to Olga's story from the beginning, because I learned so much from her. So she told me, I said, what did you learn through all this process? And she said, being in the occupied territories, these are some of the things I learned. You can have all the money in the bank, but it doesn't mean anything if there's nothing to buy. And you can have, she loved kitchen appliances. She loved to cook. She says, you can have all the fancy kitchen appliances and dishes, but when the electricity doesn't work, you can't even use them. You can have the best cell phone, but it's no value if there's not a signal. The only thing at this point that matters is your relationship with God. And she discovered how important her relationship with the Lord was, and decided not to just stand still, but to help others because of that. Yeah. And so we've learned so much from them, and we'd love to share with you ways that you can get involved. I think, first of all, we need to be praying for this war to end and praying for believers. We have a thing about praying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as you're praying, I mentioned this during the sermon a little bit about the stark difference, religious war that is taking place, or I should say that it's a spiritual battle that is taking place in Ukraine today. We need to recognize that here in the church in the West. It's a spiritual battle. Just before the war broke out, the European Evangelical Alliance, they survey and they understand the context of churches all throughout Europe. It's their focus, European Evangelical Alliance. And they said that the place in all of Europe that the church is most persecuted was in the occupied territories of Ukraine. And I told you before that one of the freest, most vibrant churches in Europe is the Ukrainian church. I know we hear on the news that there's religious persecution in Ukraine. It's only in the occupied territories. It's not in formal or proper government-run Ukraine. Huge religious freedom in Ukraine today. All the stories I'm sharing with you are a free hand allowed the church to thrive and to move forward and to become a driving force in all of Europe, even sending missionaries to Central Asia and Russia and other places like that. So that's something we need to be thinking about. We need to be thinking about and understanding that in Russia, there's some really, really bad things happening today. One of which, a friend of ours, and Carl and Lori's as well, Yuri Sipko, he was the head of the Baptist Union of Russia. So he would be a Tim Keller type or some John Piper, some kind of big evangelical name in Russia. He heard last August that his home was going to be raided. The retired head of the Baptist Union. The reason for that was because he had been very vocal against the war and how this war is a wrong thing to do. He got word of it, he was able to flee. But I can show you, and I sent at the time some clips to Carl, news broadcasts, 10 minutes long, where they're coming into his apartment and they're going through his apartment and showing how this man was supporting the war, how he was supporting an anti-Russian, a Nazi himself, all of these horrible things.
That American cult.
At the bottom it said American cult at the very bottom. And this is the kind of propaganda that's being circulated constantly in Russia. So we need to be praying for this war to end. We need to be praying for Putin and this authoritarian regime to be humbled. That is something we definitely need to pray for. Go ahead, grab that book in the back, and you can understand a little bit more the kind of what Putin has been doing in the last 25 years since he's come to power in 2000. And it's really surprising to understand the context that's there. So be praying for the end of the war. Be praying for Putin to be humbled, for spiritual and physical protection of people, for spiritual breakthroughs, for Brother Yuri that I mentioned to you before, for our teams in Warsaw, for our church connections still existing in Krakow and Gdansk. You don't have to remember all those names, just be praying for all of that. For the spiritual breakthroughs in Ukraine as well. Be praying for our teams that have gone through a very difficult time. Some of them separated from their families. Imagine my teammates, missionary teammates. Dad is in Ukraine. He was drafted by the military, age 45 years old. He's now serving as a chaplain and a chaplain trainer. His wife and children are in the UK, and we're 2 years into the war. That story repeats itself a lot, and that's just hard on families. So just be praying for our Ukrainian brothers and sisters whose families are separated like that. And of course, be praying for our family too. So, projects.
Yeah, so some of the things that Mission Eurasia has been involved in, you see here a wood-burning stove. Because they were losing electricity, we had this idea and we're able to manufacture wood-burning stoves in Ukraine. For $250, we could get a stove and wood into a home or a church to be a warming center for Ukrainians. So we do that, I'm anticipating every winter until the war ends. Mobile clinics. So we've partnered with Christian Medical Association, and
it's a Ukrainian medical association.
They make we're making these huge vans or buses into medical clinics that can go to the front lines and help people there. Also, there's housing that we're considering doing, working on doing temporary housing where people could live for 3 months in a place until they get settled in Ukraine. So there's lots of opportunities. The things are out there that explain the project, summer camps, Gift of Hope, all of these things. So we appreciate it if you want to contribute. Also, just to be involved here with refugees. I don't know if there's Ukrainian refugees here. I know there's Afghan and probably other Middle Eastern refugees in the area. And you have the opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus to refugees in Grand Rapids as well. So that would be a great way for your family to be involved.
Mm-hmm. Any questions? Yeah.
very, or older men.
Yep.
They get there and you can only take care of them so long, you can't
Yeah.
provide income for them. Is there, do these countries help in that way, or are, I mean, you know, you go there and you're 70 years old, 60 years old, what kind of a job you gonna have if you do find a job to sustain yourself? I mean,
Yeah, so it depends which country you go to as to how much aid you're receiving. So Germany has a really excellent program for refugees. Poland was excellent at the beginning, and they continue to give aid to the refugees and help them have programs. But one of the things we do is we have a lawyer trained who knows the law and what they need to do to receive assistance. So we're trying to help with those things, and then those that are younger, helping them to find jobs, because the assistance will wear out. In Poland, for example, in order to stay past August of this year, you need to either have a job or be registered in a training program. So they're offering weekend training for things like dental assistant, the different trades, things like that. So we help people figure that out, like what is a way for you to stay legally, and how can you get the aid that is available.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So just sort of a follow-up to that, is people are getting trained or into the job market, can these countries absorb that many more people in the job
Great-
market?
great question.
How is this affecting their economies? Are they
Mhm.
able to withstand, I mean, we're talking 7 million people here.
Yep.
There's a lot of new workers you have to absorb into your economy. How is this affecting those countries?
It is extremely difficult. And you have to recognize there's nowhere to return to for many of them. You know, their homes have been destroyed. They're presently still under occupation, like Olga's story that Esther shared before. You know, their place is definitely under occupation. They don't want to go back to that. And so it's challenging. You know, the Polish people were extremely receptive to the Ukrainians when they first came in. Poles understand more than anyone, probably in Europe, the threat that Russia stands for them. And in that way, they were very receiving or welcoming to the Ukrainians, hospitable. But imagine any of you having someone live in your house for 2 weeks, now 2 years. That happens, and that's true. And people just have had to leave because it's just not sustainable. I don't have a real good answer for you. We're trying to help those that we can in our side of things, but it's a tough one.
And we're seeing a lot of political unrest in Poland because of this now.
Yep.
Because the Ukrainian grain, which used to be shipped, is now coming across the Polish border, and a lot of the farmers think that their jobs are at stake. So there's a lot of political unrest, and everyone who was supporting before
Yeah.
is now like, I don't know, because now we're in reality. What does this mean when we have all these people? And there's a lot of our Ukrainian children have said that they are being bullied in school a lot. They're considered less than, and it's really challenging. So there's
Yep.
just so many levels to this.
So we try and help in the small ways that we can, but you know, on a government level, we're not working in that place, obviously. What we see, though, is we see the individuals. You know, I know we often talk when we watch the news, you know, and the global picture of immigration, and I'm not getting into that, I'm just, but the global picture of it. But here we are working with, you know, the people in this, kids in this picture, one-on-one, and they're the ones who are struggling and are trying to figure out what to do, and their homes are gone or whatever. So,
Any other questions?
great questions, very good questions. Yeah.
Your Schools Without Walls ministry, I'm assuming in the past was in Russia. Are you is that door closed? Are you still involved with leadership training in Russia? And what is this current dynamic doing to that?
This isn't being recorded, right? Well, so Mission Eurasia has been extremely supportive of Ukrainians. So as an organization, we're persona non grata in Russia. But School Without Walls is a grassroots movement. So we do bring trainers in and train people. They're all Ukrainians. I mean, I'm an exception, so keep that in your mind. It's Ukrainians or Russians or Central Asians or Moldovans going in and doing a session, doing a training. But the intent is that next year, that entire training, the trainer will be someone from that local church or that local area. So it gets less and less and less outside influence from the organization. So we have School Without Walls networks happening still in Russia that are completely disconnected to Mission Eurasia formally. Does that make sense? So it is happening, yeah.
The director in Russia did leave. He's in Moldova. As soon
Yeah.
as the mobilization happened in Russia for Russian soldiers, he felt like he needed to leave. His wife's Ukrainian, and he's like, there's no way I'm going to be fighting against Ukrainians in a war. So he's serving in Moldova now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now that after August, Ukrainians will no longer be able to go to Poland for their safety, where else will they be able to go as a first step?
So I think they might still be able to come, but if they've been there for 2 years, they have to have a plan, is the deal.
Yeah,
So
that's the difference.
you have to work or go to one of these things. And if you can't, it will be difficult, because if in Europe, wherever you landed at first, you're registered as a refugee, and you can't switch countries as a refugee. If you move to another country, you're now just in immigration. So if you went initially to Germany, you have a really good, program for you. But
Yeah.
if you decide, I'm in Poland and I'd rather be in Germany, and you move to Germany, they're not going to give you government aid. You need to stay where you registered as a refugee. So I think they're still accepting people. They just are trying to put parameters, which is wise, right? You can't indefinitely support people for the rest of their lives. They need to be contributing to society.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I know this is a really serious topic, and I appreciate you sharing, but I'd like to really hear some stories about Bill when he was a kid. And what a bad brother he was.
What a bad brother he was?
Bill is 10 years younger than me. He was a late addition to our family. I was really happy because I was like, I'm not going to be the youngest anymore. So I kind of felt like I was his second mom, and I took it in my duties to make sure he didn't watch TV shows that even mom let him watch. But I'm like, no, that's not okay for Phil, right? So it's hard for me to imagine him as, like actually an adult sometimes. Poor guy.
Yeah.
When he was 11 when we got married, so,
And he didn't like me at first. I say that tongue in cheek. He did. But the reason why is every year at Christmas, Esther would go and spend the night with him in his room in preparation for Christmas morning.
we're going to wake up at 4 a.m. and get the whole family awake.
And then she had the nerve to go get married, and it didn't happen anymore.
He was my buddy.
Oh, gosh. Other questions?
All right.
I'd like to ask somebody, I might even just go with it. Carl, would you kind of close us in prayer and maybe remember some of these things? And would you be willing to do that? Okay. Don't forget, grab a book. Sign up for our newsletter. There's other brochures. If you're interested, just grab whatever you want. It's free game.
I'm just encourage you to wait till they get to the back to stop them, so that way they can get back there. And feel free they'll stick around if you guys have any questions. And so we're thankful for them both here. By the way, Esther, I'm 42 years old now, so I don't know what that makes you, but thanks for coming out. Thanks for joining us and listening. Next week we start a series called Dual Citizens, where we're going to look at our citizenship.